So today we're going to talk about Stoicism. Stoicism is a massive topic. It corresponds to a period in antiquity. We're talking about the 3rd century before Christ. It's a philosophical movement that came after Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And it's a movement that has endured through the centuries, that has undergone quite a few evolutions and even distortions. It's always difficult to approach a great philosophical current like this one because the question is, where do you start? And the problem is even greater because Stoicism corresponds to what we could call a total philosophy. Total philosophy, meaning it's not just a system of thought, a system for understanding the world. It's both a theoretical philosophy and a practical philosophy. It's a philosophy that's oriented toward both understanding and action. Action in the world, and therefore destined for the individual. I'm going to start with a quote that we often reference to summarize Stoicism. There is what depends on us, and there is what does not depend on us. So the Stoic vision of the world is already based on a first separation, a separation that we must become aware of to understand our limits as human beings, and our limits as individuals. There are things that depend on us. For example, it depends on me to work hard, to succeed. It depends on me to seek truth. It depends on me to act well. It does not depend on me to be tall, strong, or powerful. It does not depend on me to be beautiful. It does not depend on me to be born in this place or that place. So we can understand quite well what the Stoics are telling us. There is what we inherit, and there is what we build ourselves, obviously. We could always argue that this limit is somewhat blurry. For example, the Stoics say it doesn't depend on us to be rich. But we could point out that yes, it does depend on us to be rich. If I direct my actions toward material and financial success, I have a better chance of being rich than if I do nothing. So we can always find details where this division between what depends on us and what doesn't is debatable. But in broad strokes, we understand what it means. Becoming aware of this distinction between what depends on us and what doesn't. For the Stoics, this is just the first step. It's the first step toward the awareness that we are not capable of doing everything and that we are fundamentally limited. From this point of view, Stoic philosophy is a call to humility. Humility which is nothing other than the recognition of our powerlessness, our finitude. We can say it in reverse. If I have wishes, desires, or ambitions that are totally disproportionate, somehow I'm going to be confronted with my limits. I won't be able to access everything I want. And when I encounter obstacles to my desires, the problem is that I risk being unhappy. To put it simply, if I desire impossible things, I will suffer. I will suffer because I will realize that by definition, what is impossible is not accessible to me. Now this might sound totally obvious and banal. We might say, is this really philosophy? Saying that what is impossible is impossible. In a way, it's atautology. Yes. But if the Stoics take the trouble to specify this, it's because in our daily behavior, in our real behavior, we tend to forget it. We tend to believe that certain things can depend on us when they don't. And they give very concrete examples. First example, I'm aware that my life is limited. My existence on this earth is limited in time, and besides, the existence of all human beings is limited. So when someone dies, even if it's someone I cared about deeply, even someone I loved, I must accept their disappearance. I must accept the death of this person since it's in the essence of human beings to be born, to live, and to die. Being sad because a loved one dies, for the Stoics, this is first of all a logical aberration. And it's true, it is a logical aberration. I cannot make the people I love eternal. That's a fact. So this first limit of human nature, which is death, this temporal limit, I must not only know that it exists, but I must accept it. And this is where we see that for the Stoics, understanding something, being aware of something, is not simply knowing that it exists. It's accepting it in the depths of your being, even in the depths of your flesh. And it's at this moment that we realize that Stoic philosophy is not just a theoretical philosophy, but truly a practical philosophy. It's both a philosophy and a psychology. Our life is not eternal. We must accept death. We must accept our own death. As Epicurus said, learning to live is learning to die. And philosophy is all the work of accepting death. but not accepting it as something sad or regrettable, accepting it as a necessity, accepting it as a law of nature. And it's only from the moment when I deeply accept it as a law of nature that I can free myself from the sadness, the grief, the suffering that this idea normally carries. If right now you try to imagine at what age, in what place, under what circumstances you're going to die, will you die a natural death? Will you die in your sleep? Will you die in a car accident, from an incurable disease? Immediately, what will overwhelm you is a feeling of anxiety. And this feeling of anxiety, for the Stoics, is proof that in a certain way you have it accepted. The idea of death. We find this idea a lot, both among the Stoics and the Epicureans. Death is nothing. Death is nothing. Why? Because when we live, death is not there. And when we die, we're no longer there to suffer. So ultimately, we never encounter death. Death takes us away, but in a snap of the fingers, so that we don't have time to see it. So the anxiety of death is the anxiety of an idea, not the anxiety of a reality. It's the anxiety of a mental projection. And this is where we start to approach the core of Stoic philosophy, the role of imaginary projection. That makes the individual never totally in their present reality. We're never really in the present moment, if you will. We're always in anticipation of the future or in nostalgia for the past, but ultimately, we're never really in the present. The problem with these projections is that they give birth to emotions in us, emotions that the Stoics called passions. So this is the old term for talking about emotions. Passion in Greek is called pathos, pathos which means suffering. And passion is what we are passive toward, what we undergo. Fear, regret, jealousy, envy, anger, all these are emotions. These are passions, but these are things that are first creations of our mind. And it's proof that we don't accept existence as it is. I took the example of death anxiety, but we could take tons of other examples. If, for example, I'm jealous of my neighbor, I'm jealous of my neighbor because he has a nicer car than me, or because he has a more beautiful wife than me, more beautiful children than me. Whatever. Well, this jealousy is a projection of my mind. That is to say, if my neighbor didn't have everything that I don't have, I wouldn't be unhappy. So it's because my neighbor has what I don't have that I have this frustration. That translates into jealousy. But in this case, it's not my neighbor who is responsible, it's me. It's me who lets this thought, and the emotions that flow from this thought. It's me who lets these emotions take over me, take over my emotional state. So I'm responsible for it. So it depends on me. And here we arrive at this idea of the Stoics. I must not be affected by what doesn't depend on me. All right, so first observation, there is what depends on me, there is what doesn't depend on me. Second observation, I must not be affected by what doesn't depend on me. I said earlier that fear of death was a logical aberration for the Stoics. But in fact, for the Stoics, all emotion is a logical aberration. For a simple reason, an emotion doesn't solve the problem that causes it. Actually, for the Stoics, the cause of our emotions is ourselves, but we spontaneously identify the cause of our emotions with something external to us. If I'm angry, it's not my fault. It's because someone made me angry, because someone put me in anger. For the Stoics, this is bullshit. If we're angry, it's because we can't control our emotions, and the other person is just a pretext to justify our anger, that is, to justify our inability to control our emotions. We are responsible for our emotions. Proof of this, there are people who manage their emotions very well. There are people who manage not to let themselves be disturbed or affected by external events, including events that can appear extremely serious and painful. And besides, we say of these people that they know how to remain stoic in everyday language means impassive, without passions. It's a form of indifference, but not an indifference linked to an absence of consciousness. On the contrary, it's a mastered indifference, an assumed indifference, since it corresponds to the awareness that there are things that don't depend on us. And the Stoics tell us, why be affected by what doesn't depend on you? It won't solve the problem. Anger won't make the reasons for anger disappear. Jealousy won't make the reasons for jealousy disappear. For the Stoics, emotions are a bit like the heat produced by energy. that we can't channel dots, so we need to externalize this energy through an emotion, but it doesn't solve the problem. If I bang my knee against the corner of my coffee table, I can insult my coffee table or hit it all I want. It won't make my pain disappear. Well, maybe. It will allow me to expend the energy that's due to my pain and the anger that results from this pain. If I watch a TV show with a certain guest as the main invitee, I can insult him and throw my remote control through my TV all I want. It won't solve anything. So what the Stoics tell us is that it's useless to be in emotion and That's why another quote from the Stoics is, "Don't seek to change reality, but change the point of view you have on reality." Now obviously, we're going to say, what is this philosophy? Which is ultimately a philosophy of submission, a philosophy of passivity. It's legitimate to say that if I accept everything, it's a form of renunciation. It amounts to saying I must accept injustices. I must accept, for example, that someone can lie to me, steal from me, deceive me. I must accept my neighbor's immorality, because the Stoics tell me that if I don't accept, then I'm in madness. Yes and no. Don't forget that the Stoics make the difference between what depends on me and what doesn't depend on me. There are things I can have control over, and the Stoics tell us clearly, give me the strength to change what can be changed. So the first difficulty is knowing what can be changed and acting at my level on what can be changed. But I must not have pretensions that are beyond my means. I must not think that I'm capable of revolutionizing the world all by myself with my little arms. I must accept that the changes I can bring, the transformations I can operate on the world, well, they will be in the image of my capabilities. That is to say, not much. Relatively to the world, not much. But I have the choice between doing what I can do and giving up by saying, after all, it's useless. I have the choice. I can accept to give up and tell myself, what's the point? But in this case, for the Stoics, I'm not doing what depends on me. I abandon. I give up. I resign. But why? Because I can't stand the idea of not having more grip on the world. So in fact, I give up out of ego. I give up because I say all by myself, I won't be able to operate the changes I want to operate. Okay, but that's reasoning dictated by ego, dictated by emotion, dictated by the feeling and desire for omnipotence. But there, for the Stoics, we're still an aberration. So for the Stoics, we act on the perimeter on which we can act, and we don't worry about the rest. We don't care about the rest because the rest doesn't belong to us, because the rest belongs to the world, and the world continues its path without us. We are part of the world. We leave our mark on it, but we are not its owner. It belongs to us as individuals to do things we are capable of. It does not belong to us as individuals to act in place of others. So rather than a philosophy of renunciation, I would speak of a philosophy of lucidity. I think, and this is a completely personal judgment, that people who accomplish great things are people who don't worry about what they're not capable of doing. They are people who worry exclusively about what they are capable of doing. Having unattainable dreams is the best way to never realize a single one. Desiring the impossible is the best way to remain in inaction, therefore in passivity, and therefore in the frustration that necessarily accompanies this passivity. The philosophy of the Stoics is a practical philosophy because it's a philosophy that pushes us to put our acts in conformity with our thoughts. We said earlier, if I evolve in emotions such as anger, jealousy, resentment, my actions will bear the mark of these emotions. On the contrary, if I act with enthusiasm, if I act with a sort of gaiety, unconditional joy, joy that doesn't need a reason to be, well, for the Stoics, I am much freer because I don't depend on my emotions, because I don't depend on unrealistic ambition. I don't depend on illusion. For the Stoics, our emotions make us slaves. It's very clear. Our emotions prevent us from seeing and understanding reality as it is. It's like a filter we would put between us and reality, and which at the same time would distort this reality in our eyes. If I start from the principle that the world existed before me, and that it will always exist after me, well, that relativizes my capacity for action and transformation of this world. But that doesn't mean I'm not capable of anything. It means I'm aware of the limits within which I can act. Emotions make us slaves since by definition, we don't choose to have emotions. In fact, For the Stoics, it would be more accurate to say, we undergo our emotions because we don't make the effort required to master them. The Stoics think that the goal of human existence is to achieve happiness and wisdom, since for them, wisdom is the condition of happiness, and wisdom is also linked to knowledge, to understanding. I understand the world. I understand the way it works. I accept it. And because I accept it, I can be happy. There's a phrase by Sartre that summarizes the Stoic point of view quite well. What's important is not what has been done to us, but what we do with what has been done to us. What does that mean? It means that we all have a character or temperament, even if we should distinguish these two notions, and we are all more or less inclined to feel, to experience emotions, passions. That doesn't depend entirely on us. There are people who are rather choleric. There are people who are rather calm. There are people who are rather worried, others who are rather peaceful. That's true, but nothing prevents us from working on that. Nothing prevents us from becoming aware of this character that is ours and working to change it, since that is within our possibilities. And to change that, it goes through an approach of understanding the world and its laws. The Stoic vision of the world is a deterministic vision. That means that for the Stoics, everything that happens in the universe happens for a certain reason. Now, for a certain reason doesn't mean there are gods pulling strings and pushing us to act in one direction rather than another. We could summarize it like that, but it would be a bit too simplistic, and especially, some would say, it's still a religious vision. I'm not interested. It's not for me. No, it's not that simple. It consists of saying that when something happens, it's because there are causes to this event. No event happens without causes. So when we want to say that everything has a reason, we actually want to say that everything has a cause. But the word reason is interesting. We'll see why. Everything that happens has a cause or a set of causes, which means we can explain everything that happens. Explaining doesn't mean automatically accepting. And explaining doesn't mean justifying in the sense of legitimizing on the normative level. On the moral level, for example, if a man commits a crime, we can explain his crime through a medical, psychological, psychiatric diagnosis. We'll say, for example, that he's someone who himself suffered extreme violence, who became what we call a psychopath, and who acted. Well, but that doesn't justify his act in the sense that it doesn't excuse it. For the Stoics, this distinction between explaining and excusing doesn't really have a place to be. When I say it doesn't have a place to be, obviously it has a place to be in the social framework, but it doesn't have a place to be in the sense that if something happens, it's because it had reasons to happen anyway. It's because it has causes anyway, since nothing happens without causes. Everything that happens is an effect of causes that precede it. So if we were capable, from the point of view of our knowledge, of identifying all the causes of what happens, we would realize that everything is normal. And I should say rather that everything is logical. Everything is rational. Reason encompasses everything that is logical to understand. And if something happens, it's because this thing had causes. And these causes are understandable. I'm not saying we're capable of identifying all the causes of what happens, but we're capable of knowing that these causes exist. I'll take the example of coincidence. The famous coincidence. You meet someone you hadn't seen for a while, and you meet them in a totally improbable context. It's not possible that we meet here, there, now. What a coincidence. Coincidence, or rather the feeling of extraordinary coincidence, is something we've all experienced, but which for the Stoics corresponds only to our individual point of view. And if we wanted to be a bit mean, we'd say it corresponds to our ignorant point of view. Ignorant because we are actually surprised by something when we don't know its causes. That's what surprise is. We ignore the causes. But if we had known the causes of the event before this event happened, we would have been able to anticipate it. We would have been able to predict it as the logical, rational, necessary consequence of these causes. I'll take an image. Imagine you're in the sky and you have a view of a city. You see all the streets between the buildings, and therefore you see all the people moving around. And therefore you're able to see when the people are going to cross at a street corner. Because you have the omniscient point of view, you're above. And therefore you see the encounter before the encounter takes place for you. Nothing is surprising. But for the individuals who meet and bump into each other at the street corner, it's extraordinary. So it's a question of point of view actually. Surprise, astonishment, coincidence. The feeling of coincidence, it's a feeling that's specific to the individual. But if the individual were capable of elevating themselves from a rational point of view, that is, from an objective point of view, from the omniscient point of view, well, actually they wouldn't be surprised. They would expect it. For the Stoics, nothing that happens is astonishing, because they adopt this omniscient point of view, because they know that when something happens, it's because there were reasons for it to happen. And that's determinism. It's the fact of saying that everything that happens is the necessary effect, that is, the fatal effect of causes that precede. This event, for the Stoics, the universe is totally rational. If it's rational, it obeys the laws of logic. It's therefore understandable in its totality. If the real is rational, if the real is logical, man must, as much as possible, conform to this model of rationality. Man, as part of the universe, must seek to behave like this universe. The more he behaves like the universe, that is, in a rational and logical manner, the less he will be subject to suffering, frustration, sadness. In short, the less he will be subject to his emotions. The more he approaches this model of rationality, the freer he will be. And the freer he is, the happier he will be. Happiness is when I become capable of no longer depending on my emotions, which are like leeches that prevent me from deploying my rational potential. Now, obviously, we could say, what is this totally inhuman model? Yes, indeed. We can consider that it's something completely inaccessible to human beings. This capacity for absolute objectivity, that means we're no longer going to depend on our emotions. We can consider it, but the Stoics don't care. The Stoics say, are we capable of moving toward this ideal? Are we capable of freeing ourselves from the influence of our emotions? Yes, we are capable of it. But it's not easy. Obviously, it's not easy. But the Stoics never said that wisdom was easy. Philosophers in general have never said that happiness or knowledge were easy things. They say it's possible, it's doable. Proof that it's doable is that we can form the project of it. So yes, we can get rid of, we can overcome our emotions. And it's through this work of fighting against our emotions that we can move toward wisdom. And happiness. Happiness for the Stoics is in no way the satisfaction of desires. For them, satisfying desires is the opposite of happiness. Now, if you've followed me so far, you should guess why happiness is the opposite of satisfying desire. Well, because desire is something that doesn't depend on us. Desire is a feeling that inhabits us, a feeling that can even become physical, and that comes to manifest our lack of an external object. I desire something I don't have by definition, but when I desire it, I prove that I depend on this object. In any case, I prove that my happiness depends on this object, and I'm going to spontaneously associate my happiness with the acquisition of the object I desire. For the Stoics, this is a total illusion, and besides, I think each of you can experience this. If you desire something, you want a cigarette, for example, like me right now, well, you're going to smoke your cigarette, and when you've finished it, it won't be long before you want the next one. So you won't have killed your desire in the sense that you won't have satisfied it. So the cigarette I'm smoking right now doesn't make me happy. It fills a desire. It fills a lack, but one that won't fail to resurface in some time. So happiness is not getting something we desire. Happiness is no longer depending on our desires. Happiness is no longer desiring. I desire something when I'm lacking, inevitably. When I'm no longer lacking, when I'm fulfilled. Well, I no longer desire. We can be happy in illness. We can be happy in solitude. We can even be happy in physical suffering. Besides, this reminds me of another quote from Epictetus. Epictetus was a slave. Since there were slaves who were Stoics, and you're going to tell me, well, it was better to be a Stoic when you were a slave. It helped you endure. That's true. But there were emperors who were Stoics, like Marcus Aurelius. For example, Epictetus reports an anecdote. At one point, he said that someone was trying to break his arm by twisting it, and he had said, "You're going to end up breaking my arm." And then his arm breaks, and he says, "Ah well, you see, I told you so." So it's a somewhat amusing quote to say that the total Stoic, the accomplished Stoic, is one who is capable of being in pure observation, without any emotions, and without any expression of suffering. Now yes, we can consider that it's an ideal. That's a bit difficult to achieve. But I would point out that certain human beings of our time are capable of achieving this kind of state, what we call yogs, who are capable of enduring absolutely intolerable suffering through detachment of the mind. So the Stoics indeed advocate this kind of practice, notably the practice of meditation, which is a channel toward wisdom, in the sense that meditation allows us to concentrate on our consciousness rather than on our body. So I'm going to try to conclude. The Stoics tell us that there is what depends on us and what does not depend on us, and it depends only on us. To no longer be dependent on what does not depend on us. For the Stoics, the universe obeys laws, implacable laws, what we could call the laws of fatality. But fatality doesn't have a negative connotation among the Stoics. Besides, if we want to be honest, it's especially in our contemporary societies that fatality has a negative connotation, since we consider that from the moment there is fatality, there's an absence of free will. But for the Stoics, it's not like that at all. Free will exists for the Stoics in the sense that it depends on us not to be affected, not to be moved by the implacable necessity of the world. It depends on us, and it depends only on us, to be happy in the situation that is ours. This doesn't imply that we must be passive in the face of existence, in the face of what happens. It only implies that we must show discernment, lucidity about what can be changed, about the reasons for changing what must be changed, and about the means employed to change what must be changed. Stoicism is a practical philosophy. Besides, today Stoicism has converted into personal development techniques. I have nothing against personal development techniques. I simply think they are a superficial aspect of something much deeper, which is a philosophy in its own right. We can't simply take the practical aspect of Stoic philosophy and say that's enough. No, since for the Stoics, this capacity to master one's emotions, this capacity to become the captain on the ship of our existence, this capacity can only be the result of an approach to understanding the world. Understanding the world doesn't mean accepting it, but it's impossible to accept it if we don't seek to understand it. Understanding the world is understanding that what happens has reasons to happen, and that what is the only arbiter. I can deplore a situation on an individual level, but it doesn't change the fact that this situation has a reason to be, and it doesn't matter if I don't understand the meaning. It doesn't matter if I don't understand the causes. It doesn't change the fact that the situation is there and that I can only accept it. It's useless to resist what is implacable. It's useless to get angry because it's raining or because it's cold. It won't fix anything. Well, if I get angry, I can at least warm myself up. That's something. But if I accept what is a priori disagreeable to me, well, it ceases to be disagreeable. Personally, I use Stoicism a lot when I read the comments under my videos. I tell myself, well, there's a reason for this, so I accept. Stoicism is very practical, and especially it's a philosophy that acts on us when we read fragments of it. I really recommend that you read Marcus Aurelius's Meditations for myself. And you're going to realize that while reading, you have a strange sensation of appeasement as you read, as if the implacable logical evidence of what you're reading balances you, aligns you inside. And when you're in this state of mind, when you're in this state of neutrality with respect to your emotions, you realize that indeed, everything is justified from a rational point of view. In any case, everything is justified. And if life is not limited to reason, well, there's no reason for life to be a long succession of suffering. Thank you.